Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Gregg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
Part two now, we're going to move on to sex abuse. Today in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article, "The Surge in Young Workers Has a Dark Side, Sexual Harassment of Teens on the Job." Last week in the New York Times, lawsuit claims widespread sex abuse at Illinois youth detention centers. Then there's this other one that I picked up, Explorer. I'm not even really sure. Police Explorer programs where they're bringing in teens to try to help them, I guess, get taught about policing and all that, and that's blowing up in these kids' face. So, it's hard for me to believe that there's so much sexual abuse going on in the world, but I guess it's here to stay. Is it here to stay? So tell me what you're doing on that front. Let's talk about what you, Micha, are doing to help with this problem.
Sure. Let's start with, what is it here to stay? I mean, I think there's some piece of the human condition that will always be around where people who are very damaged for whatever reason continue to hurt other people. But what we know about recidivism is that if there's no accountability, people will repeat these crimes. That is what all of the data shows. So what we have to do is try and hold every single perpetrator accountable that we can, because that is the only thing. That, and also getting the perpetrators to understand how to be trauma informed themselves so they know what their triggers are that are going to cause them to offend. Those two things are the only way we can bring the numbers down. And I know it feels like, especially after the Me Too movement, like all of this has just exploded. The numbers are so high. Could this really be true and happening? And the answer is yes. We're just talking about it now. The Me Too movement had some great pieces of it, and there were some other aspects that caused a lot of backlash that was not helpful to the movement.
Yeah.
But the reality is this was all going on before. The numbers are what the numbers are, unfortunately. It's very disturbing and very upsetting, but I look at it like, for me, one case at a time, one perp at a time. I hope before I retire to put myself out of business, because we have solved the problem of child sex abuse. But, until then, I'm just going to fight every case I possibly can.
And so again, I think there's two components on a large view. There's the institutional problem, and then there's the individual perp problem. So institutionally, I mean, we've got the Boy Scouts, we had the churches,
School
schools,
districts,
the juvenile detention centers. I mean, everywhere that as a parent, you thought your child was safe.
Right.
Think again. So on that front, are you focused on that front?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the cases that we do are institutional cases, and there's a whole additional layer of trauma when an institution fails a child or fails the family as a whole. And we see time and time again, the reality is the perpetrators go where the kids are. So if there's a park or a job at a school or the opportunity to be, Boy Scout, Girl Scout, troop leader, that's where the perpetrators are going to go.
Yeah. So it sounds like if that's the case, if that's the formula, this should be something that should be handled properly. And I know the Boy Scouts have really gone through the ringer and all that, and they've tried to set up systems where there'd be two adults in the room with the child. So do you feel like we're making some progress in dealing with institutional sex abuse?
We could be. I think it's too early to tell. The problem is what we're doing is creating additional rules, and people find ways to break rules. I mean, you see it where you know, inmates are raped by the guards, you
Yeah.
know, there are rules against that already, but it's still happening. So these perpetrators are people who are going to push the boundaries. And if they have seen a pattern for themselves where they can violate the rules and not get caught, they're going to keep pushing the boundaries. And that's why we see escalation in force, escalation in violence, escalation in numbers. You know, it really is something that if we cracked down the very first time something happened, then, you know, it would make an impact. But we see this time and time again in employment sexual harassment cases and institutional sex assault and abuse cases where people look the other way because the guy's a nice guy and he couldn't have done that, because it's so horrific to think that anyone could do this. But, you know, so that's, again, one of the good things about the Me Too movement is that it has given people the ability to understand that this stuff is out there and it actually happens. I will tell you that until 2018? When did the Me Too movement happen?
I don't know.
2019. Before then, when I would walk into court, I started, you know, 20 yards behind the start line because people did not, you know, they finally understood the Catholic Church issues, but they didn't understand that this stuff was happening to the level and to the extent. And so now when we go into court, there's at least, I think maybe we're only a couple feet behind the start line in terms of believability that this stuff could happen. And the defense we always see, whether it's a child or an adult, is they're lying.
Yeah. So that's, you know, and you know, I've had cases myself, sexual abuse cases. You know, I just finished one where, you know, at a charter school, 9 years old, and, you know, the lawyers that I was dealing with, they're like, oh, she made it up. And I'm like, how does a 9-year-old, how, you know, how dare you even come up with that theory? But, you know, from what I've understood, I've had cases in foster care and churches and all that. And I see that a lot of the, you know, the victims don't want to say anything, and it's, you know, or they do and people don't believe them. Is that, you know, when you talk to me about the Me Too movement, it seems like that might at least give the victims a little bit more hope that they can come out and say it and not be completely shunned and not believed. Do you think that has been a byproduct of the Me Too movement maybe, or is this problem not getting any better? Like you know, you know, basically, hey, this person here just raped me and I'm 10 years old.
Right. Yeah. No, it has not gotten that. It has not gotten better to an extent where it's really making a difference. I think where the Me Too movement made a difference in terms of credibility is just by reporting. So women and not children, but women, adults, are a little bit more comfortable coming forward on reporting. The next step is, are you gonna you know, testify at a criminal trial? Are you going to file a civil lawsuit? Like, once those things happen, we still see the same amount of victim blaming and fear that, you know, that's what the defense is going to be.
Do you feel like the government, the authorities are improving in addressing these issues? And if not, like where do we need to go with them?
Yeah. So not really. It depends on the department. So I'll tell you, for example, I have a case right now in LA where we have 14 victims. The first woman reported that she was raped by the same perpetrator in 2014, and they threw their hands up and said, it's a he said, she said, we can't do anything about it. Other people reported, and in 2018, 2019, the DA's office did a press conference saying we're bringing charges, and they got over 100 calls. So this was a perpetrator who was prolific. So we're seeing a little bit more willingness now for them to engage and not be so afraid of the he said, she said argument, because when you do this work and you know how victims respond and you know the typical stuff that perpetrators do, if you can build up an MO, a pattern,
Yeah.
that's really all you need for the criminal piece of it. But I will say, you know, so the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office did the right thing by bringing these charges against this particular perpetrator recently. I have another case against a major luxury hotel. It's not the first time I've had to sue them for sexual assault in a massage room. And each time the local sheriff's department comes out, they do a nonsense, poor, haphazard investigation. And then they talk the victim out of reporting.
Yeah.
They talk the victim out of getting a SART exam. We've gotten some publicity on this. I'm not suing them. I don't have a case against them. I just want people to know this particular sheriff's department is not doing their job.
Yeah.
So any way we can motivate them, whether it's shaming them publicly, or having someone run against the sheriff or whatever it is, we have got to put pressure on these officers, these sworn officers, to do a better job and to understand how trauma victims report and how their memory is going to, you know, potentially be spotty and why that is. They need all kinds of trauma-informed training, and they really just have to do their jobs instead of trying to talk the victims out of going forward.
All right, so I want to talk a little law, statute of limitations. And this is really at the heart of a lot of the problems in getting recovery for victims. You know, you're 12 years old, this happened to you, it's ruined your life, you never told anybody about it. Some states, you know, most states have like a 4-year or 2-year or 3-year statute of limitations. You have to, you know, file your lawsuit, you know, within that time period, or your legal rights are out. And then some states, because of the, you know, just the mass number of victims and sexual abuse, have opened up statute of limitations. I know California did. I know we talked about this about 5 minutes before we even started our show, so I could be a little bit more educated, but tell us what's going on with that and who qualifies, you know, going forward, I guess, is really the operative phrase.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and a lot of organizations and advocacy groups have gone around the country to get all kinds of states to increase their statutes of limitations. Some have completely abolished the statute of limitation going forward. Others have recently done look back windows. So that is essentially the reopening of a statute period for claims that have already expired, that where the survivor blew the statute, so to speak, and could not bring a claim. So, and you know, I think that all of us who have been involved in legislation and these advocacy efforts really have done a decent job explaining to legislators and people who don't work in this world day in and day out how long it takes a person to process their trauma, how long it takes to even for a survivor to even name what happened to them, to be able to say, I was raped, or my father fondled me, or whatever it is. Saying these things out loud can take years or decades. And it's also a very lengthy process for people to understand and be able to link certain traumas to alcoholism, domestic violence, like other traumatic experiences that have happened to them because of how compromised they are, because of all the trauma they've experienced. So it's kind of layered in terms of how trauma impacts people and their brains. And so what we see are, you know, it taking decades sometimes for people to be able to come forward. So I'm thrilled that we are starting to, and doing a decent job at it, recognize that this takes a while. Here in California, we had done several windows, look back windows, where we say, okay, for this period of time, for example, in the early 2000s, we said, okay, we're going to let victims of priest sexual abuse, clergy sexual abuse come forward and bring a claim. And we had consolidated cases throughout the state, and we were able to get through thousands of claims and cases. So those survivors were able to get a little bit of justice and a little bit of accountability. We also have done 2 different windows for horrific abusers from USC and UCLA, staff gynecologists at the medical centers who were sexually assaulting victims. Those windows have closed. We had a window for a year for children, then we had a window for a year for adults. Some adults, depending on when they were sexually assaulted, still have some time. If there's a cover-up, if they can allege there was a cover-up, and they weren't able to come forward earlier. And then we also have a statute that says if that you have 5 years from the time you realized the harm that was caused to you by sexual abuse or assault, that allows for people who, have kind of blocked out all the memories, and when the memories resurface, they understand the extent to which they were impacted. We have a statute like that. And then it was signed into law, I believe, last January. We essentially said, going forward, there are no more statutes of limitations. If you were a child abused, you have as long as you need to take to bring your claim.
Yeah. All right. So not a simple answer. And so anybody out there, who's been victimized, sexual abuse out in California, could happen a long time ago, or maybe it happened, 2 years ago, and it's years from now and you're actually listening to this episode, you might be able to take legal action. And so obviously the first step would be to call Micha, and I'm going to drop all her information. What is the best way to get in touch with you?
To call our office, the phone number is 510-645-1000. And we can also be found at libertylaw.com. You can reach out to us that way. I do, a ton of co-counseling with wonderful firms all over the country. So whether you were abused in California or are a California resident or not, I still want to encourage folks to find out what their options are wherever. And I can help put you in touch if you're in New York, for example, with people who can help.
Did we miss anything on this episode? Any legislation that might be on the way? California, federal, anything that you know of that might excite you?
Yeah, there's a great bill by Senator Lindsey Graham, who's not a natural political ally of mine, but as a former lawyer and trial lawyer, I think he understands our issues, and he introduced a potential law, a federal law called Earn It, which is essentially to change Section 230 and not allow it to apply as a complete bar against claims against social media companies for child sexual abuse or anything related to sex trafficking online. I think it's a great piece of legislation. There is a Micha's Law equivalent here in California. It's SB 646, and it will help provide California residents the ability to bring a child sexual abuse material claim, just like Micha's Law would in federal court. You can bring one here in California in state court with a California jury and get the same relief. So we're hoping that gets passed onto the governor and gets signed this year.
All right. So we'll circle back maybe a year from now, do another episode, and you can update me on all this discussion, and hopefully we're making some progress. Maybe we need to take baby steps, to get the ball rolling, on all the fronts, legislation, the authorities, the parents, the social media, the lawyers. It's going to have to be all hands on board, it sounds like, to get this problem handled, these problems handled.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah. I hope we're having a conversation a year from now, celebrating a lot of successes that help protect.
All right, I'm going to predict that we are. All right, how about that?
Good. I like it. I like the positivity.
All right. Well, this is Micha Star Liberty from Liberty Law. Not only sexual abuse claims, sex discrimination, employment, all that, street fighter of the year, so many distinctions. I couldn't list them all. You're going to have to see my show notes so you can, like her mother, really get down and dirty about all that she's done. But thank you for showing up today, Micha. It was a pleasure to meet you. Good luck with everything, and we will be in touch. And that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase podcast. Subscribe, rate, review, questions. If you want me to ask her questions on specific things, you can do that. Go to my YouTube channel. You'll see little clips from this. You can ask me the question. I'll forward it to her, or you could call her up yourself. All right. That'll do it. Micha, you take care of yourself. All right.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.